President Obama is trying to sell his jobs plan, including the so-called Buffett rule that essentially would make millionaires pay more in taxes. Some prominent Republicans say it's tantamount to class warfare. So let's continue the conversation with our guest, Columbia professor Charles Calomiris, a specialist in financial institutions and frequent advisor to Congress and the U.S. government. Charles, in his interview with our own Juliana Goldman yesterday, the Treasury Secretary said this about the president's proposal: "We think they're good ideas. We think they're good economics. We think they're better for the economy than the alternatives." Your response?
Also, Secretary Geithner, as far as I could tell, was being very vague. That is, he seemed to even climb down from some of the specifics of the president's plan and just said, well, we need to broaden the tax base, flatten tax rates, lower marginal tax rates, get rid of tax deductions. Those are all good ideas. Of course, the best version of that we have on the table, at least, is the Bowles-Simpson plan, which is a real plan, unlike the president's plan. The president's plan has a lot of flaws. First of all, it's too small. Secondly, the numbers don't really work. That is, the numbers aren't really going to deliver even the gains. The programs he's talking about wouldn't deliver the gains in deficit reduction he's promised. But more importantly, it's a step backward. About a decade ago, there was a clear academic consensus that we enacted in legislation to reduce marginal tax rates on dividend income and capital gains income. Now, nobody's saying it, but that's what this whole Buffett idea really reverses. It's designed to take us back to a higher dividend tax rate and a higher capital gains tax rate. That's anti-growth. That's taxation on capital and investment. If you want to change the tax rates, flatten the tax system, focus on low marginal tax rates on individual income for personal income, that's the Bowles-Simpson plan. That's where we should be headed.
What about Warren Buffett, though, saying, look, anybody of his stature has not refused to invest because of concerns about taxation? I mean, his point is, look, honestly, rich people are always going to invest. That's what they do. They look for opportunities. They invest. They don't really care at the end of the day how much they pay if it's a slight increase.
It's not true. So, I mean, look, Deirdre, Warren Buffett's a brilliant investor. He's not an economist. He probably doesn't spend a lot of time reading the literature on tax policy. But there's no question that the literature on tax policy tells us that when you raise marginal tax rates, you substantially affect both savings and investment, particularly small businesses that are affected by personal tax rates. But another huge reason why we lowered dividend tax rates was to take away the distorted incentive for corporations to over-leverage themselves. That was actually the prime motivation that Glenn Hubbard had, as far as I could tell, during the Bush administration. We actually are much better off than we would be if corporations had joined the consumer binge for high leverage. Corporate leverage actually fell substantially in 2003 as a result of the dividend tax policy cut. We don't want to destabilize our economy with unwise tax policy. Why not go back to the Bowles-Simpson plan and give it a chance? The president set up a commission and then he hung them out to dry. And then he's coming up with these policies that are nonsensical instead.
Charles, would the Bowles-Simpson approach correct the distorted picture that Warren Buffett sees? And it's a hard one, as we all know, to argue with. Why am I paying less in tax than my secretary? Do you think Bowles-Simpson would address that?
I think it would, and I think that it would do some other good things. When we talk about broadening the tax base, let's also remember 51% of Americans pay no income tax. That's not very good for a democracy.
51% don't make very much. That's one of the reasons they don't pay much in income tax, if anything.
But my point is, if we're going to broaden the tax base and lower marginal tax rates, we do want to make sure that there's that everyone's participating in that. And it's not healthy for a democracy to have 51% of the people who are voting on tax policy not paying any of those taxes.
What about 22% for everybody?
Yeah, I mean, let's go back to Bowles-Simpson. The maximum tax rate's about, I think, 27%. I can't remember offhand. But the point is, we had a presidential commission, a bipartisan commission. They sat down and said, let's really solve the problem. What would it take? They came up with an answer. It wasn't very popular on the right or the left. The president hung them out to dry. That was a failure of leadership. It's about time that he stepped up to the plate, really, not just with this political campaigning rhetoric.
So it sounds to me, Charles, as though you disagree more than you perhaps started out by saying with Tim Geithner. This is bad economics.
Of course it's bad economics. And by the way, I'm sorry, I don't mean to insult the secretary, but he's not an economist either. And of course, he's never been a businessman. So, I'm not sure who you want to listen to about this, but maybe we should go back and read the academic literature on policy and tax policy, which is pretty clear.
At the same time, though, not to jump to the secretary's defense, but he said that these are a series of principles. You did point out that he was even more vague than the president.
That's true.
The idea is to correct a perceived imbalance, let's say, between middle-class taxpayers and the wealthiest Americans.
But again, we don't want to correct that in a way that singles out capital income for taxation in a way that reduces growth. That's going back to the future. We don't want to do that. We've already, I hope, learned that taxing capital income is not a good idea.
Well, clearly, as you point out, the devil will be in the details. The details aren't here yet, but they're going to have to show up at some point. Charles, a delight to have you here in the Inside Track. We look forward to our next conversation.
Thanks, Charles.